I'm Michael Bungay-Stanya. This is Change Signal. This is the podcast where we cut through the blather and the BS and the noise to find the good stuff that works in change and transformation. As Change Signal has evolved, I've started to see really two types of change experiences. One is the steady waves of change that roll through an established organization. And that's what many of these conversations have been about. The other, to continue our water-based metaphor, is the explosive geyser of change you find in Silicon Valley, where organizations are scaling rapidly on what is basically a do-or-die mission. It's move fast, it's break things, it's dumpsters burning, it's everything churning.
Working inside of a fast-growing company is basically living in a constant state of change.
That's Molly Graham, and she's been a Get Stuff Done, capital G, S, and D, at Google, at Meta, aka Facebook, at the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation, at Quip. So she really knows the Silicon Valley growth and change experience. And in fact, her focus now is Glue Club, which is for startup operators, the people who hold things together, thrive, and do a great job. And doesn't that sound exactly like you as a change leader? So in this conversation, Molly's digging into destruction, into loneliness and community when leading change, skills of managing upwards, what it means to give up control, and you're going to meet her monster, Bob. Molly, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
One of the things that I would notice from people who lead change is often some project gets handed down to them. They're like, make this happen. And the team kind of goes, oh, great, we've got a project to work on. And they kind of get going on it. But they perhaps haven't got to the heart of, well, why are we doing this and what's important around that? What have you learned around what it takes to make a project, a process, important enough that the team finds that sense of purpose and kind of intensity around it?
This is a lot of what I teach in Glue Club is how do you build strong, successful companies. And, one of the things we spend a lot of time talking about is vision and goals, which I would say are the sort of first building blocks of any successful thing, which is if people don't understand why they're here, which is how I think about vision, right?
Yeah.
If they don't understand why they're doing the work that they're doing, and then if they don't understand how they're supposed to get to whatever the why is, then you literally have tiny objects all moving in different directions. Like one of the things I say a lot in Glue Club is either you prioritize for people or they will prioritize for you. Yep. So if your why is not clear and your how is not clear, people will choose how to spend their time.
Right. Right.
Fundamentally, goals are a communication mechanism. And all successful projects have focus. They have like a clear sense of what the most important thing is that they have to get done in order to be successful.
So what have you learned about how to craft a vision, a why, that actually is compelling? Because in my experience, there's nobody who shows up going, I have no vision here. How do you help make the vision better?
I think it's very, very obvious when it's either so ambitious that it's unrealistic or so confusing, meaning like dissonant or something from what the company is actually doing, that again, it's not useful. But the most common thing I find inside of startups is confusion. One leader, like the CEO is talking about a zebra and the head of product is talking about a giraffe. You know what I mean? Right. And you got two different people spinning two different stories, which all that does is lead to people building a really weird animal that has stripes, 4 legs, and a medium-sized neck that, anyway, isn't good at anything.
It reminds me of that George Bernard Shaw quip. The problem with communication is the illusion it's taken place.
I think of vision as a sort of stop and fix problem, which is if you don't have a clear, consistent one that everybody agrees on, then you can't actually build a high functioning team because you'll end up with sort of the zebra-giraffe problem.
Yeah.
And the question is whether the vision matches reality. Has the vision evolved in the way that it needs to, or are there basically competing visions that are sort of tugging people in different directions?
Molly, one of the truths about the people who are leading change in organizations is they're often, certainly for the people listening to this podcast, they're typically not in the C-suite themselves. They're not typically part of the senior leadership team. They're a level or two down from that. And it means that they're trying to figure out how to manage upwards. How do you manage the powers that be? I don't know this for sure, but my guess is that, in your time at Google, in your time at Facebook, maybe at your time at Quip as well, part of what you were doing was managing upwards and managing people there. What's your tips on being a savvy manager of managing upwards?
Yes, done a lot of managing up in my life. I would say on my list of strengths is you give me brilliant, headstrong founders, and I am great at helping them take their vision and turn it into a reality, which requires a lot of managing up. We could talk about this one for a while, so I'll probably just give you one or two. But, number one, I think the most valuable thing in the world you can do when you're working for someone is make their job easier. That requires figuring out what their job is, which sounds really obvious, right? Oh, they're a CEO, but usually there's like a whole part or side to their job that you don't see. So for example, if you work for a CEO, you might not be involved or understand what's going on with the board. If you work for, a head of marketing, you might not understand what's going on laterally to them. You might not understand what it's like to manage their boss. So the more you can understand all the different dynamics of their job, what the priorities are, what the pressures are, and then figure out really what is the most valuable thing you can do to make their life easier. Usually that involves thinking like them. What would I do if I was sitting in their chair? What would I do if I ran the marketing team, or if I ran the finance team, or if I ran the engineering team? How would I solve this problem?
Yeah.
What would I be worried about next? What are we not thinking about? Sitting in that leadership chair, there's often just a lot going on,
Right.
And having someone that works for you that is thinking for you, that's able to get out of the blustery storm that you're in and think, gosh, we're not thinking about this, or, oh, this is coming around the bend and we're going to get hit by that bus. Like, that's one of the most valuable things in the world that you can possibly have.
I want to interrupt to say this was actually a pretty unexpectedly powerful insight for me. It stops me from just going, oh, I have to manage upwards, which can feel a little bit like, oh, I'm trying to manipulate an inanimate object. I'm trying to be a puppet master. It's more about, identifying really who needs to be engaged, and then going, well, what actually is their job? Beyond the title, what actually are they trying to do here? And then how can I help them solve a problem? How can I solve a problem for them? I think that's brilliant.
So I will give you my one other very valuable thing. When I was going to work at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, I was going to work with Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan to help them get their philanthropy off the ground. One of my greatest mentors and the women I admire most in the world ran the Gates Foundation for 10 years. And I was asking her questions and she said this thing to me. She said, at the Gates Foundation, she was managing Bill Gates, who everybody knows, Melinda Gates, who most people know, and then Bill Gates Sr., who lots of people don't know how involved he was in the Gates Foundation. But essentially, she had three bosses. And she basically had a rule that any fight that she was going to fight, anything she felt strongly about where she disagreed with them, that she would fight that fight 3 times. And on the third time, if she lost, she would give up. And the other piece of this rule that I really love was that she wasn't allowed to fight the fight the same way each time.
Oh, that's so good.
And I think it's been very valuable to me, and I've passed it on to a lot of folks in Glue Club, because I think sometimes we get maddened. We're trying to make this case to our manager about, like, we have to do this, or we have to focus on this, or we shouldn't do this thing. and they're not listening to us, right? They're like, yeah. And the truth is, as a manager, what happens is somebody fights with you about something once, you absorb it, you think about it, and then you move on. And if they bring it up again, you're actually less likely to listen to them.
Right.
Because you're like,
You're
I get it. You care about
yeah.
this thing. I don't, I've moved on. So her point was you can't use the same hammer each time. So if you fought and you lost once, what's the next best way to try to fight this fight? Somebody else brings them the problem. You got the board, you got outside advisors, you got other people on the team, you've got data. Like there's other ways to fight the fight. But her point was, you only get 3 tries. And underlying that is, listen, buddy, like it's not your company. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like ultimately, they're going to make the decision, and your job is to try to give them as much information as you can to help them make what you think is the best decision. But there's lots of times when you kind of just got to see how things play out and realize this isn't life or death. And it's just like, that you might feel like they're making the wrong decision, and I don't know, let's go try something and see who's right. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's great. Because I can't tell you how many times in my career I've gone and died on a hill that I definitely did not need to die on. Didn't help me, didn't help anyone. I just took myself out of the game. Molly, how do you work with people who really don't want things to change, who are kind of emotionally attached to the way things are right now?
Oh, man. Well, the process of building and scaling things is emotional. And it's something that I think we don't talk about enough. And the reason the emotion exists is the subject of your podcast, which is change, right?
Yeah.
Change is both necessary and really uncomfortable for people. And it's normal to feel anxious, uncomfortable, et cetera, throughout that. That's helpful for you. It's also helpful in understanding what might be going on for other people as you try to change something. So very common example inside of companies is like, I built this thing. I'm very proud of the way I built it. And now they're asking me to give it to someone else, or someone else has come in on top of me or to the side or whatever. And I'm supposed to give it away to them, and I'm supposed to like trust them with it. That is wildly uncomfortable. And to get good at it, you actually have to get good at the belief that it's okay if that person messes with what you did, and B, that there's something bigger, better, and more fun for you somewhere else. So when you see people react emotionally, the most interesting question is, what's going on for them? Why is this emotional for them? Is it a point of pride for them? Is it a fear thing? Sometimes you find something that they care about and they just didn't know how to say it. Like, hey, it really matters to me that X, Y, and Z stays the same, or that, that we don't lose this principle, or we don't lose this value, or we don't screw over this person or whatever. And that's solvable. The thing staying the same might not be solvable, but like the fundamental thing underneath it that they're anxious about is probably solvable.
If you're enjoying this conversation with Molly, you'll find her on LinkedIn and on Substack. Her full name is Molly Graham. And in both LinkedIn and Substack, she shares some great insights in her writing. And her membership site is glueclub.com. So if you're not dealing with them, the emotions tend to hang around. But if you've got, let's say, grief around moving away from something so that something new can show up, like, you don't really hear people talk about grief or even just more generally processing emotions at most organizations. I'm curious what you've learned about helping people move through that when it's kind of a bit weird to talk about feelings.
Yeah. And one of the things I've actually talked about, I'm glad you used the word grief, is work grief. Because I think grief is a great example of something that we don't acknowledge, but absolutely exists at work. And like, if you just think the most obvious example, is like a layoff. And a lot of times when you're a leader leading a layoff, you're very focused on the future. You've gone through this horrible, painful, multi-week, multi-month process to trim back your organization in a way that feels necessary, but also devastating. And on the day that you announce it and, say goodbye to the folks that are leaving, your brain is immediately like, future. We're focused on the future. And the problem is that everybody that you just communicated it to, they're at the beginning, right? You went through a process of actually mourning the past. Everybody else is just beginning. So as a leader in that phase, often there can be like some frustration because people are feeling sad. They're feeling, and sometimes we're like, oh, we'll give them a day or we'll give them 3 days. But it's like, no, this is a huge grief moment where we've asked people to move through this change, and you need to let them go through anger, go through bargaining, go through whatever to get to acceptance.
Yeah.
And, for me, when you think about all sorts of big change, grief is like often a huge part of that we as managers don't make enough space for. And a lot of what people need in those moments is just time to move forward.
I've heard it called the marathon effect, which is when the leaders who've been thinking about whatever the changes they cross the finish line. They're like, oh, good, thank goodness that's all over, and we've pressed the button. And everybody else is still running the marathon. And you think everybody else's, your emotional impact as a leader is I've finished and I can move on to the next thing. And you tend to forget about the other people out on the course.
Right. Is everybody with me or not?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think you said it was like 5 years since you started Glue Club?
We started 2.5 years ago, but I've started on the journey a couple years ago.
Perfect. What do you know now about what's most useful to the people in Glue Club that you didn't know 3 years ago?
If I had to pick one, I'd say it's amazing how lonely being an operator is. I think that we thought that the value of this, we call it a leadership development community because it's both, we do programming and it's really fundamentally sort of a fabric of people supporting each other. And I think I thought the value was going to be in the content and the teaching and, the peer relationships that might, build a network or whatever. But actually, I think the single biggest piece of feedback we get is I feel less alone.
Right.
I thought I was crazy. And it turns out everybody else has this problem too. So I guess I'm not crazy. And I guess also my startup isn't as crazy as I thought it was, or sometimes my startup is crazier than I thought it was.
Hey, fellow change leaders. Well, I guess this applies to us as well, right? The loneliness of leading change. So I'm curious to know where you find your community, how you feel less alone, if at all. If you've got some thoughts on this, please email me. You'll get me at podcast@thechangesignal.com. I'm genuinely interested to hear your thoughts.
I think it gives people, it's so important to have a sense of perspective.
Right.
When you are building. And for anyone that's inside of a smaller company, a lot of times you are alone. The more senior you get, the more lonely it is. And
for sure.
You're less likely to have people to learn from. You're less likely to have sort of true peers up until you become CEO, and then you definitely don't. And so you have to seek that elsewhere. You have to find community that can support you and listen to you and hear all the ugly truth outside of your company. And that's not a skill that you learn, until you get pretty senior and you're suddenly like, I feel like I'm on an island, Yeah.
What have you learned about building community and building connections?
I've learned a lot. The fabric of community is essentially a place where you feel like yourself, where you feel like some part of yourself is seen and understood that may not be understood in other contexts. And being able to talk about the real shit, to be able to say like the walls are crumbling and the ceiling's caving in and I'm scared or I don't know what to do. To have a place that's safe to do that. And I think it doesn't take a lot to build those places, like a community that can actually do that for people if you have the sort of right foundation.
And by right foundation, is that intention or is it something else?
I think in our case, it's been about having sort of a set of values that about how people show up and how they show up for each other. And then I would say the right kind of programming or content that essentially sends people in a certain direction. I'll give you an example. I've come to believe there's like 4 levels of networking. There's basically like level 0, which is like the kind we all hate, where you like show up at a cocktail party and it's like, who are you? Like, what do you do? Should I care about you? Where are you on the social hierarchy? And then there's like level 3, which is like, what's your deepest shame? What's the hardest thing you've ever, basically shit that gets to the core of who you are as a human being. Yeah. And I actually think one of the things that defines communities to some extent is, where does the conversation start?
Right.
Are we at level 1? Are we at level 3? Are we somewhere in the middle? And that tells you a lot about sort of like, what is this place and what's it for?
That's interesting. Because probably, I'm guessing, but where the conversation starts sets the boundary to where it can go.
Yeah, and it sets the sort of norm of what do we talk about around here, I run a different community that is always at level 3. We actually sometimes forget. we joke that we forget to let people say where are you from and where do you live and do you have a family, because we go immediately to what's your what are you grieving right now or whatever. So I think there's value in all levels, and I think where the sort of majority of your conversation happens really sets a norm that can be very powerful.
Okay, so as you hear Molly say this, what level would you say you engage your change colleagues on? I mean, maybe not level 3, what's your greatest shame? At least not on day 1. But I'm curious to know what it would mean to be holding conversations at level 2. And what would shift if you did? I do have a final question perhaps, which is if you were to give me one piece of coaching or guidance around how best just to manage myself through ambiguity and chaos, how would you teach me?
So about, I would say, sometime in my Facebook experience, but it might actually have been at Quip, my little startup that I helped build after that, I realized that there is just a very normal roller coaster of emotions that comes with change, and that it was never going to go away. Right? That no matter how senior I got, no matter how good I got at all of this, there was just always these emotional attacks when change happened, good change, bad change, emotional attack. So because my brain is weird and I grew up on the Muppets, it manifested these emotions in the form of a monster. And I named my monster Bob, and Bob became this friendly looking little dude who traveled around with me. And it was he's always with me. I would say on good days, he's nibbling on my toes, right? And on bad days, he's eating my whole arm, and he's trying to send my Slack messages. Do you know what I mean? He's trying to send my emails. Yeah. He's trying to hit send on the rage email, And the trick I've found is to get really clear about the fact that Bob's always going to exist.
Yeah, he never goes away.
B, he never goes away. B, Bob is the manifestation of all emotions that are both incredibly normal, right? You can't get rid of them. Everybody has them. And they are not useful. They are not the emotions that you should actually listen to in terms of driving your behavior. So you have to get good at observing, there's a bad Bob day. You know what I mean? We're having a bad day. Got to shut the laptop. But also one of the things I learned after manifesting Bob was that it isn't these are not the kind of emotions that, go away if you sleep on them overnight. You go to bed, you wake up the next morning, you still want to hit send on the rage
Bob's
Slack.
Still there. Bob's still there staring at you.
Yeah, exactly. And so I came up with this sort of give it 2 weeks rule.
Right.
And for me, what I found was that, these emotions are like waves that kind of roll through you. And anything that lasts longer than 2 weeks is something you should pay attention to. But 95% of these emotions genuinely just go away with that sort of 2-week time period. And that's how you tell the difference between Bob and what's real. And that little monster guy has been very valuable to me in terms of processing the emotions that come with change. And I think it's really important to understand that every single person in this world has a Bob, right?
We all have Bob.
You can name your monster whatever you want to name your monster. Sorry to all the Bobs out there, but you can name your monster whatever you want, but you have a Bob, your boss has a Bob, everyone around you has a Bob. So if people are acting weird during change, really at any time, a lot of times it's because of Bob,
There's an excess of Bob about. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's helpful to understand that sometimes it's about helping them figure out how to process those emotions and not act on them. And as a manager, there's a lot of work you can do to help your team kind of through those moments. But frankly, just naming him and having a little picture of him in my head was a huge amount of the work for me. It was just realizing those emotions are always there, no matter what.
That's fantastic. Molly, thank you.
Yeah, so nice to meet you.
You might know that quote, "Be kind, everyone's fighting a hard battle." Well, perhaps we want to rewrite that now in light of Molly's comments. Be kind, everybody's wrestling with their bob. I love that we ended on that note of generosity. And also thanks for your generosity in supporting the podcast by giving a review, showing some stars, spreading the word. That's kind of you indeed. And thanks also for doing this work. I'm glad you're here.